Evening, and welcome to the candidate debate for Georgia Senate District 50 seat. My name is Patrick Malone, and I'll be your moderator for tonight's debate. Senate District 50 comprises all or part of 8 counties in Northeast Georgia: Banks and Franklin, Habersham and Hall, Jackson and Raven, and Stevens and Towns. The questions this evening were submitted by voters throughout the 50th district. Tonight's debate is sponsored by the Town County Republican Party, as well as the Republican parties from all the other counties in District 50. The ground rules for tonight are as follows. Each candidate will have a 1-minute opening statement, and then each candidate will have the option of 1 minute to respond to each question. Any response that references another candidate by name, that candidate will have an additional 1 minute to respond. At the end, each candidate will have 1.5 minutes for a closing statement. The forum will go on for 2 hours until we run out of questions, whichever comes first. Raven County Republicans will be running a straw poll on their Facebook page immediately following the debate, so to be sure to vote for your candidate. Our candidates tonight in alphabetical order are Andy Garrison of Jefferson. He is the principal managing partner of a real estate firm. Dan Gasway of Homer, a farmer and a residential builder. Stacy Hall of Clarksville, a real estate developer and the Habersham County Commission chair. Bo Hatchett of Cornelia, an attorney. Tricia Hise of Clarksville, also an attorney. And Lee Moore of Franklin Springs, the owner of a transportation company and the mayor of Franklin Springs. Good luck, ladies and gentlemen. Let us begin with our opening statements, starting with Mr. Garrison.
Hello, my name is Andy Garrison, and I want to represent the people of this district using the knowledge, skills, and experience I've gained as being your public servant for over 30 years. We need common sense approach to these issues that we'll be facing in the years to come. I've spent my professional career working for you as a state trainer, training your public safety personnel, and I want to continue as your next senator. I want to make Georgia a better state, but I need your help. I'm Andy Garrison, and I would be honored to serve you and be your voice under the Gold Dome.
Thank you, Mr. Harrison. Ms. Hise.
Good evening. My name is Tricia Hise. I'm originally from Northeast Georgia here in Senate District 50. I am a mom, a wife, a Christian, a small business owner, and I'm one of you. I'm running for State Senate District 50 because I believe that you deserve to have a voice under the Gold Dome, and I am that person to portray that voice. Much like many of you, I'm also a small business owner. And I'm very much in the trenches right now, suffering through the greatest economic disaster that we've ever faced. I promise you that I am working hard with each and every member of our Senate District 50 and will continue to do so under the Gold Dome. I am pro-life, pro-guns. I am also pro-small business and pro-agriculture, having grown up in an agricultural basis. I'm Tricia Hise, and I ask for your vote.
Thank you, Ms. Hise. Mr. Gasaway.
Good evening. My name's Dan Gasaway. I'm a 1984 graduate of Habersham Central, which I grew up in Habersham County. I'm a 1988 graduate of Georgia Tech. I worked in Atlanta for 10 years after I graduated from Georgia Tech and moved to my farm in Banks County in 1998. I've been self-employed since 1998. I work as a builder. I still dabble in farming, and I do some agriculture or architectural design work. I'm the only candidate in this race with any legislative experience. I served 6 years in the Georgia House of Representatives. And in these difficult times, experience matters. I appreciate your time. I appreciate the Towns County, Raven County Republican Party putting this group together tonight. And I look forward to the questions and answering those questions. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Gasaway. Mr. Hatchett.
Hey, I'm Bo Hatchett, and I hope to be your next state senator. I'm an attorney, a third-generation small business owner, husband to my lovely wife, Ashley, and proud father to 2 beautiful little girls, Hallie and Hazel. I was shocked when Stacey Abrams, a liberal socialist Democrat, almost became our governor. I'm a staunch conservative running to protect our North Georgia way of life. I believe the Constitution was written for one purpose, to protect our God-given rights. I'm 100% pro-life, pro-Second Amendment, and I believe in supporting President Trump's agenda on the state level. My campaign slogan is Homegrown Republican because I'm a reflection of this community. I grew up in Habersham, played quarterback for Habersham Central, went to Georgia Tech, and went to Georgia for law school. I'm the only state Senate candidate in the state of Georgia endorsed by Governor Nathan Deal. He's a strong Georgia Republican in our district, and I believe I earned his endorsement because I'm not a politician. I'm a product of this community, ready to provide trustworthy representation in Atlanta. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Hatchett. Mr. Hall.
Well, good evening. It's great to be with you tonight. Thank you for the opportunity. My name is Stacey Hall, and I'm asking to be your next state senator for District 50. All of us here tonight are professing to be strong conservative Republicans, and I believe that to be true. We all say that we're pro-life, pro-Second Amendment, that we're pro-Trump, and I believe that to be true. So what is the difference? I'm hoping tonight that we can differentiate ourselves. I believe right now it's experience. And I believe in a time like this, more than any other, experience matters. Folks are hurting. Folks are struggling throughout our district. And they want to get the economy revived and recovered and get folks working again. My background is in business. I work for large companies. I work for medium-sized, small companies. I'm a small business owner today. And it's very important that we get the economy working again. So I would like, throughout the course of the night, I'm going to share with you a little bit about my experience, and I think that'll be the difference in this campaign. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Hall. Mr. Moore.
Good evening. My name is Lee Moore, and I'm another one of the 6 Senate District 50 candidates. And I'd like to thank Towns County GOP for putting this on this evening. Patrick, for you moderating this event. A little bit about myself. My wife, Misty, and I have 3 beautiful children that we are raising in Franklin County. Both Misty and I are Northeast Georgia natives. I'm a small business owner. Previously, before I started my business back in 2008, I was a elementary, middle school, and high school teacher. I taught in several counties that are in Senate District 50. I have been the mayor of Franklin Springs for the last 10 years, up until recently in March when I had to step down once I qualified to run in this race. Over those 10 years in Franklin Springs, together we put together a strong team. And that strong team, we transformed our community to a vibrant and financially sound place to live, work, and raise a family. I'm pro-life. I'm pro-Second Amendment. I'm anti-tax. And as your next state senator, I will work to keep our way of life, our Northeast Georgia way of life, as it is today. Thank you for your vote.
Thank you, Mr. Moore. Our first area of questions will deal with state finances. And the first question, very timely. The state economist is predicting a 14% or about $4.3 billion revenue shortfall through fiscal year 2021. How would you recommend that we balance that budget? The first answer goes to Ms. Hise.
Well, thank you for the question. We are faced with undeniably difficult times. There was a memorandum that went out yesterday to all of the state department heads that is requiring a 14% budget cut across the board. This 14% budget cut is in addition to the initial 4% budget cut that was requested by Governor Kemp in October, and then the additional 6%, which happened in January. So the 14% is the baseline that of the 2021 fiscal year that has to be cut. We're mandated by the Constitution of the great state of Georgia to have a balanced budget. And I know that the men and women who serve down under the Gold Dome are working hard. But I can tell you this, what will not be cut from me is public safety and our teachers. We're going to have to rely heavily upon local revenues and look at the amount of revenues that have been stored up by local resources. But I know that by working together and bridging a gap between the state and the local levels, we can preserve our law enforcement, our public safety, and our teachers.
Thank you, Ms. Hise. Mr. Gassaway.
Thank you for that question. Certainly, we've all seen these same numbers. I predicted this a week or so ago because I, again, served 6 years in General Assembly. We're going to have to reduce education. We're going to have to reduce public safety. We don't have a choice. These numbers are going to get worse before they get better. And the only hope we have is to get this economy going. The next state senator for this district is going to face more pressure to raise taxes than any state senator in the past 30 years. You're going to have somebody with a proven record of fighting and standing up against tax increases. Georgia Chamber of Commerce is going to put so much pressure on the next state senator to raise taxes. It's going to be unbelievable. I've been in the trenches. I've fought tax increases. I've been attacked for not raising taxes in my last election. But you're going to have somebody that's willing to fight the raising of taxes, because we're going to have that pressure like never before. There is no way that all areas of state government are going to escape substantial reductions. It's just the reality of the world we've come into here. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Gasaway. Mr. Hatchett.
Thank you. So, first, I think we owe Governor Deal a great debt of gratitude for leaving us this rainy day fund. It's got $2.7 billion. $100 million has been used. We've got $2.5 billion left. Now, where's that money going to go? Those are going to be tough decisions. The 14% that Governor Kemp suggested agencies cut from their budget, as you said, adds up to about $4 billion, $4.3 billion. Agencies are going to have to make cuts, but you can't cut your way to prosperity. What we're going to have to do is we're going to have to generate revenue. A great way to generate revenue, especially in Senate District 50, is through agriculture and tourism, and somehow bringing those two together like they did in South Georgia with the Georgia Grown Trails. I'd love to bring something to Senate District 50 to help our agricultural community and jumpstart our economy. Tough times don't last, tough people do, and people of the Senate District 50 are tough, and we need to get back to work.
Thank you, Mr. Hatchett. Mr. Hall.
Yes, sir. Thank you. Well, I think a big part of it is going to be to try to work with our businesses and stimulate the economy as fast as possible, help them get hiring folks as quickly as possible, revamp their businesses as quickly as possible. The good thing that this, and there's several good things that come out of this very difficult situation, is that businesses have learned to be creative. They've learned to be lean. Certainly they're wanting to expand, but we need to get the government out of the way. We need to make things easier for folks to be able to hire and get hired. We need to cut regulations, cut the bureaucratic red tape. And I believe that businesses can quickly prosper and build up that tax base. Yes, we're going to have to make some very challenging cuts. Yes, for the record, I'm not supporting any tax increases to do that, but I do think we can increase revenue through growing our economy, helping our businesses prosper. My background in business, I think I can work with businesses to help get that done, and I'm looking forward to the challenge.
Thank you, Mr. Hall. Mr. Moore.
While we do have a sizable rainy day fund, current estimates are predicting budget shortfalls for the next year, so not even close to be covered by that. The governor and the current legislature and the future legislature, they're going to have to work together and review each budget line and determine if it's necessary and should taxpayer dollars be spent. As any budget, like my personal budget, my business budget, the city of Franklin Springs budget, there's always fat in that budget, and that fat should be trimmed first. And I believe we should be looking at spending reductions first, drawing down a rainy day fund last in order to stretch those dollars as far as we can. I believe taxpayer dollars should only be spent if it's constitutional, if it reduces the size and scope of government, and it should lessen, not raise the tax burden on Georgians. I've seen it firsthand as the mayor of Franklin Springs, what good can be done in a community when there's a team to provide strong leadership. In Franklin Springs, we had budget crunch, we had budget downfalls, but we eliminated debt, updated roads and infrastructure, and improved city services, all while cutting taxes, and now our city's in strong financial shape.
Thank you, Mr. Moore. Mr. Garrison.
Thank you so much. Let's just be honest. It's $4 billion right now. We don't know what this COVID is going to do to our economy, but there is one thing that's just a standard in budgeting. That is raising revenue and cutting expenses. And how do you do that? Well, I hate to say it, that I lived through the Great Recession that we had several years ago. And the one thing we saw was no raises, and many of us got furloughed. And every services we provided are going to have to be evaluated, reduced, and maybe possibly eliminated. But we got through 2008, 2009, and we're going to get through this. You know, we all got into this COVID and this problem that we have, not intentionally, but we're all in it together. And the way we're going to get out is working together. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Garrison. I suspect that our next questioner kind of anticipated the answers we were going to get to the first question, because they asked this follow-up question: what specific expenses could be reduced, and/or what revenue sources could be increased? And that question starts with Mr. Gasway.
Thanks for that question. Of course, the state budget was being managed very well for the past 8 to 10 years. So I don't really see a lot of things that can be immediately reduced that are going to make a substantial amount of difference. Public education, K through 12, is about 40% of our state budget. Now, I had a proposal when I was in the General Assembly to allow us to tap the hotel motel tax, which is a tax that's on every room in hotel motels and is specifically dedicated to Chamber and Visitor Bureau type activities like convention centers. I had a proposal to allow that, at counties choosing, allow county governments to tap that fund, a portion of it, for law enforcement. That would take the burden, some of the burden, off of law enforcement for property owners. I think those are the type of creative proposals we're going to have to bring back forward. It's going to face opposition from CVBs and Chamber of Commerce types that think that a tax increase is the solution to every problem. But I think that is one area where we can generate more local revenue for counties. Thank you.
Mr. Hatchett.
Well, once again, you can't cut your way to prosperity. You know, I think one of the ways that we can help stimulate the economy, first off, would be to decrease payroll taxes on small businesses that are able to bring workers back to work right now, because the biggest thing we can do for Georgia is to restart the economy by creating more jobs and getting hardworking Georgians back to work. You know, there's a $28 billion budget that was passed. Almost 50% of that goes to K-12 education. And I think Governor Kent did a great job giving teachers their raises, and a well-deserved raise. And I would never support any legislation to decrease teachers' salaries if I'm elected. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Hatchett. Mr. Hall.
Yes, sir. Thank you for the question. Again, and I don't mean to keep harping on this, but I really do believe that the answer is not cut. Although we are going to have to do some of that, and everybody might have to share some of the burden. Certainly in my background in education, I spent over 12 years in the classroom teaching at every level of education. I would fight against cutting education. Well, when you include higher ed, is 53% of our budget. That's a big deal. I do think we need to look at some sunset laws on some of the tax breaks that were given some of the industries. One industry in particular is the film industry. I know this may be a little bit of a double-edged sword. Certainly in our district, we've had some benefit by that, but the cost of that may outweigh those benefits. So I think we need to look at some of those tax breaks. I'm a big fan of incentives. I think we need to incentivize industry to do certain things. The more they hire, the more the greater the output, things of that nature. We can incent. One thing about corporate America is they like incentives, and you can get them to do what you want if you incentivize appropriately.
Thank you, Mr. Hall. Mr. Moore.
Yes, sir. Well, that's a hard question that really and truly is going to be really tough to answer until the time comes. But, you know, there's things that could be done with our current situation that could help stimulate and get the economy going, with jobs, with economic development, with different restrictions, cutting red tape, taking government out and letting the people do what they do and know best. Other thing is open up county-wide, statewide opportunity zones for different businesses so they can have less red tape to get things back going and get people back to work. Another thing is for our agriculture, our farmers. Take away the red tape and keep Georgia grown. Georgia grows, Georgia knows best. So, you know, do more for our farmers and put it in our people's hands, but do that by taking away the red tape and stimulating our economy with our people.
Thank you, Mr. Moore. Mr. Garrison.
Yes, thank you again for that question. Number one, we've got qualified people working for our state government right now that on their own shops has been given a directive to cut their shops by 14%. they're the ones that I'm going to be leaning to find out what needs to be cut in their areas. And as far as revenues, there's a lot of things we can do to boost revenues, but most important thing, in my opinion, is a common sense approach. But we also need to boost the confidence we have in Georgia. We need people to go out and spend their money. We need people to come out. We need to get out and start working. We need to put our people back to work. And if they're back to work, their confidence is going to grow. They're going to go out there spending. And our mom and pop businesses in this state are going to be what's going to pull us out of this slump. I can't say it enough. A common sense approach. Thank you.
Thank you. Ms. Hise.
Yes, thank you for the question. As it relates to what type of line items need to be eliminated or cut, I think that what we are going to be looking at is more work from home and the reduction of cost of maintenance to buildings, state buildings, that sort of thing. And so moving forward, those type of cuts are going to be line item. As someone running for Senate District 50, I can tell you this. The last people that I want to cut are people who are earning a living through the state. And so that's going to be very, very last on the list. Back to law enforcement, our public service providers. Without having them in this COVID-19 crisis, where would we be? They are on the front lines. They will be protected, and so will our teachers. Now let's talk about revenue. Well, we are people that persevere. We are creative, and there are people out there and businesses out there that have thought outside the box. And we have to work together. We have to continue to bridge that gap. Agriculture is our #1 business. Agritourism and bringing people and money into the state is what's important.
Thank you, Ms. Hise. Our next area of questioning is the Second Amendment. And the first question is going to go to Mr. Hatchett. And it is, do you support constitutional carry? Why or why not?
Absolutely. I am a constitutionalist. I studied 3 years of constitutional law at the University of Georgia. And, the Second Amendment's very clear, and it was written when our founding fathers' muskets were still hot. And I think the Second Amendment is the teeth to the rest of the Constitution. And I would support constitutional carry. The Second Amendment right to bear arms should not be infringed. And I think that's all that needs to be said.
Thank you, Mr. Hatchett. Mr. Hall.
I am a constitutionalist. I support the Constitution as it is written. Yes.
Thank you. Mr. Moore.
Yes, sir. You can count on that 100%. I support the Constitution and what it stands for, 100%.
Thank you, Mr. Moore. Mr. Garrison.
Well, being a 30-year tenured law enforcement trainer and also a teacher of constitutional law at the technical college, I'm a staunch supporter of the Second Amendment. I mean, to me, asking me if I've got a gun is like asking a carpenter, does he have a hammer? A lot of people don't realize that our Second Amendment was born out of our protection against tyrannical governments from King George. We need to protect those rights. We need to protect our rights for not only for our own protection, but for the protection of our democracy.
Thank you. Ms. Hise.
Thank you for the question. Yes, absolutely. I am in favor of constitutional carry. I am a Christian conservative Republican. I'm a post-certified law enforcement officer. This is something that's extremely important to me and my family. I back the badge. I also carry. I have my concealed carry permit, and I love my weapons and my guns. Our right to bear arms is unabridged, and the Constitution speaks for itself. And as your next state senator, I will not only protect your rights, but I will further support them in making sure that we are able to bear arms. Thank you. Thank you,
Ms. Hise. Mr. Gasaway.
Yes, I have a strong record of supporting the Second Amendment. I was a fourth signer on the conference committee report for the campus carry bill, which was the ultimate bill that was signed by Governor Deal, having to do with campus carry. I have a clear record. I think everybody in this race is pro Second Amendment. The real question needs to be asked is, what do we do to get campus carry passed? Because you have a lot of lobby efforts like the Georgia Trial Lawyers Association and Georgia Chamber of Commerce that doesn't want campus carry and doesn't want constitutional carry passed in Georgia. So the real challenge for Senate District 50 state senator is, what strategy are you going to use to actually get it passed? And that's where we are. And it's a complicated battle because you're battling some very powerful lobby groups in Georgia that do not want this piece of legislation passed. Thank you.
Thank you. Our next question again deals with the Second Amendment, and it asks, how do we balance our Second Amendment rights with real mental health concerns? And we're going to start that question with Mr. Hall.
Well, that is a tough question because you want to protect our Second Amendment rights. But at the same time, you know, we've got to, I'm a believer in our due process, right? So yes, we don't want folks that can create harm for themselves and for our neighbors and family. But at the same time, you got to be very careful when you're talking about removing somebody's constitutional rights. Who makes that decision? Such as we've had issues with red flag laws. I certainly am against red flag laws because who gets to make the decision? And we're throwing due process, which again is another right guaranteed by the Constitution, out the window. So due process is very important to me. There needs to be folks' legal rights protected as you make that decision. But it's a delicate balance. I mean, if somebody has mental health issues, certainly I would not want them walking around in my neighborhood if they've committed a crime based off of their mental health issues. So it's a challenge.
Thank you, Mr. Hall. Mr. Moore.
That's probably one of the toughest questions, in my opinion, that you've asked so far, Patrick. That there is a balance there, and you know, I completely would not want to infringe on anybody's rights. And you know, with the mental health issue, you know, we never know what people are going through. Only them and God, and maybe sometimes their doctors. So with that being said, I feel like, you know, government's point or place in that, you know, I'm not sure I can even answer that question where we should even step in, because then you're infringing on constitutional rights. Now, if the question was more geared towards law enforcement and maybe the mental aspect for law enforcement, I could go a little bit more in depth with that, just for the simple fact of getting law enforcement help. Law enforcement go through things that are undescribable, and they need to have an outlet or someone to talk to. But that's for another day and another conversation. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Moore. Mr. Garrison.
Thanks again for that question. Number one, there's not a lot we need to do, because there's laws on the books right now that take care of people with mental conditions not being granted carry. Not only that, but we also have, if you've been convicted of domestic violence, you give up those rights. And also, as a felon, you cannot possess a firearms. So I'm not saying that we need to reinvent something. We just need to go back to the laws that are on the books and enforce them. There's things out there that will protect us against the mentally ill, against people that are domestic violent people and suspects, and also people that are felons. Just we need to go back to the law and go with that.
Thank you. Ms. Hise.
See something, say something. We see these posters posted everywhere. Every time I go to Habersham Central High School and I volunteer my time as a co-attorney coach, I see the post on the door. See something, say something. We have to work together. Again, I'm going to go back to bridging the gap between our state actors, our state representatives, and our state senators with our local and county and municipal governments. And so by working together and by encouraging the public to sit when they see something, to say something, that's the first step in this. I am a former prosecutor. I have prosecuted felony cases all over the mountain circuit. That includes domestic violence. I have also donated countless hours of my time in assisting victims of domestic violence. I have been honored on the congressional record for my work as it relates to domestic violence. I have also worked with our mental health courts and our drug courts. I was the first drug court prosecutor in the Habersham County. So while I'm a constitutionalist and believe in the Second Amendment, I also know that we, the people, are the ones that have to be the ones to stand up and say something.
Thank you, Ms. Hise. Mr. Gasaway.
Well, I think Mr. Garrison hit the nail on the head. We've got laws in place. I, a couple years ago, won a shotgun from a Republican Party gun raffle. And when I went to pick it up, I had to have a background check. And I've never had any kind of arrest or any kind of problem with law enforcement in my life. And so if somebody have a background check when they win a gun at a gun raffle, I would say we're pretty stringent regulatorily already. It's a tough question because mental health is certainly something we're all empathetic to, but it's like everything. We just have to move through it, enforce the laws in place. We had some legislation a few years back in legislature having to do with men that choke their wives, attempt to strangle their wives would face additional scrutiny. I mean, we have laws in place, and sometimes we don't need additional laws. We just need enforcement. Thank you for the question.
Thank you. Mr. Hatchett.
Well, this is a tough question, as everyone's already addressed. However, when it comes to the Second Amendment, if you give an inch, you give a mile. I think with the mental health concern, we see a lot of times it's in schools, and we know that's a big thing across the country. But at the end of the day, guns don't kill people, people do. And I think the best way to prevent something like that is to arm our teachers and allow, teachers to carry guns on campus.
Thank you. Mr. Garrison, your name was mentioned there, but in a positive vein. I
Sorry.
assume there's no rebuttal to that.
No, I agree with Dan wholeheartedly.
Okay. I want to remind our listeners out there that the Raven County Republicans on their Facebook page are running a straw poll on tonight's debate for the 6 candidates that you're hearing from this evening. So when you get a chance, go to the Raven County GOP's Facebook page and make your choice known. We're going to move from the Second Amendment. We're going to move up one and talk a little bit about the First Amendment. And I think the most significant event related to the First Amendment was the Governor Kemp's shutdown, and then Governor Kemp's opening back up the state of Georgia. So I'm wondering, what is your position on the shutdown itself or the opening up and the timing of each of those? And we'll start with Mr. Moore.
Well, Governor Kemp is privy to a whole lot more information than me or probably anybody else that's on this debate tonight. This has been a very extremely difficult time for our state and our citizens, as well as our country and our president. As a former mayor, I know our elected officials, they're making the best decisions they can with the information, like I just said, that's being presented to them at the time. Governor Kemp, he's laid out a plan that he feels will provide the pathway to begin getting our state back to work, getting the economy flowing. This is his decision, and he's made it, and it's a delicate situation, one that needs to be balanced between protecting the health and safety of Georgians and allowing our businesses to open. Implementing strict guidelines have been made that mitigate the potential resurgence of this COVID-19, and that's the thing. Time will tell what will happen and how Georgia was prepared or unprepared for going in the direction that we're going. But we want to make sure that we continue to protect the most vulnerable and continue good hygiene practices. But, as long as we put Georgians first, everyone should use common sense, follow strict social distancing procedures, and continue to adhere to the guidelines established by our governor and our president.
Thank you, Mr. Moore. Mr. Garrison.
Yes, sir. C.S. Lewis said it best. You can't go back and change the beginning, but you can start where you are and change the ending. And nobody, when this thing started, knew where we were going to be today. But again, with our president, with all the advisors he has, and of course with our great governor doing the same thing, they have more knowledge about when to open, where the spikes are. And I'm supporting our governor that we need to get our state back to working. It's only getting back to work when you get out and start changing our economy, getting our mom and pops back in there. So I support Governor Kemp on that. And the thing is, he didn't make a mandate that we start back. The thing is, he left common sense up to us to say, when are we ready to go back and get back in the economy? I support our governor and I support our president.
Thank you, Mr. Garrison. Ms. Hise.
I cannot imagine how difficult it is to run a state, especially during a pandemic like COVID-19. A lot of us have read about the plagues in the Bible, and I can imagine that what we are experiencing with COVID-19 must be a lot like a plague in the Bible. It's unprecedented. I support our governor and I support our president. Shutting down the state of Georgia, I believe that the preservation of life must come first. I'm completely pro-life from the unborn all the way through the elderly, but I also understand the ramifications as a small business owner. Our revenues, my husband and I, we own a small business, and our revenues have dropped 100%. I'm in the trenches with everyone else. The multiple phone calls and meetings that I've had with small business owners include, when can we get back to work? When will I be able to pay my own mortgage or my rent? So it's a balance. Certainly, I don't envy the governor for having to go through this, but I know that by working together, we will be able to have a brighter day.
Thank you, Ms. Hise. Mr. Gasaway.
Thank you. Of course, I support all the moves that Brian Kemp's made here, as well as Donald Trump. Everybody is in a situation that is never happened before in anybody that's alive today's lifetime. And they're doing the best they can. They're, as someone said earlier, privy to information we don't see. And some of that information is financial information. And I think that President Trump immediately saw the financial implications of this, and Brian Kemp is seeing the financial implications of this before all of us. And as I said in a forum a week ago, we want to have a Georgia to come back to. And if we don't get back to work in some way, shape, or form, the unknown of this pandemic is less than it was 45 days ago. We didn't know what we were up against. We had talks of worldwide shortages in ventilators, and we had talks of Army vessels having to be moved to New York City to treat the sick. And some of that stuff has thankfully come to a better reality than what was being projected. And we have to get our country and state moving financially, or we're going to be in trouble. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Gasaway. Mr. Hatchett.
Well, as far as the timing of Governor Kemp's orders, I think, he shut the state down at a good time. He followed the president's direction, and I wholeheartedly agree with his timing and opening. What he did was, he didn't require businesses to open. He left the power in the hands of the people, and he relied on local control. And that's what I think makes this state great and this country great, is there is such thing as local control. We're not a dictatorship, and Brian Kemp paved the way for businesses to choose whether or not to open. Now, Habersham County, where I live, we're technically a hotspot right now, and I know a lot of local businesses have decided not to open yet, and that's their decision. And I agree with them to protect their customers and their employees. But I agree with Governor Kemp's decisions at both times, and thank you for the question.
Thank you. Mr. Hall.
Yes, sir. Thank you. Well, I don't pretend to know all the data that Governor Kemp was privy to. I do know that here in Habersham County, as chairman of the Habersham County Commission, before Kemp's executive order, we were facing an enormous amount of scrutiny to close businesses. I was very concerned about that because so many people live paycheck to paycheck. And if they don't work, they don't eat. And that's a very real issue. And I had a lot of concern about that. And that's one of the things now that I'm so anxious to ramp up business and get them started again so folks can get back to work. I'm also the immediate past chairman of our hospital authority board. So I understand the issues facing the healthcare with during this COVID crisis, and the balance between responsibly curbing the virus and also trying to get folks back to work. So it is a delicate balance, but now's the time we need to start cranking it back up. And there is personal choice and personal responsibility. So folks need to do the best they can to take care of their neighbors and to be responsible. But it's time to get the economy rolling again.
Thank you. I'm going to switch to education now. And the first question under education is, would you support eliminating the Georgia Department of Education and providing unrestricted block grants to local boards of education and local charter schools? Why or why not? And we're going to start with Mr. Garrison.
Thank you for that question. Nobody knows how to train the people in your community other than people that are in that community. I'm not sure that I would be in favor of abolishing the Department of Education. It does need to be modified, and we need to have more power in our local boards of education because these are the people that are in the trenches. We should be taking everything down to our lowest common denominator. That's where our schools are, that's where our education should be, and that's where our decisions about our education should be.
Thank you. Ms. Hise?
That's a difficult question. I will say that local control is something that I'm absolutely in favor of. The idea of having some block grants, charter schools. I want to give a shout out to the Mountain Education Charter School that has multiple campuses throughout 50 Senate District 50, including 4 of our counties. They do a remarkable job. However, there's always some bad actors. And if you look at the old adage of one bad apple ruins a bunch, you know, the Atlanta public school system is a ripe example of that. And so moving forward, yes, I love the idea and I support local control, especially as it relates to our education. But we also need to be very wary of the fact that relinquishing the Department of Education into other areas outside of Senate District 50 is more than scary.
Thank you, Ms. Hise. Mr. Gasway.
Well, certainly I've been a proponent of reducing bureaucracy, and there is a good bit of bureaucracy at the Georgia Department of Education, but it's a fraction of the state K through 12 education budget. They're doing a pretty good job at the Department of Education right now, in my opinion. They're going to face cuts just like every agency. I think what we have to look at is the bureaucracy between Georgia Department of Education and the county level. We have recesses throughout the state that are an antiquated thing that should be cut immediately, but that involves real people and real jobs, some of them high-paying jobs. But that's the area that needs to be cut first, is the infrastructure between the Department of Ed and the local school system, because there's too much federal interface for us to completely do away with Department of Ed. There has to be some agency in Georgia to facilitate the federal money coming into Georgia and then being disseminated to the county level. But there is a pretty thick layer of bureaucracy between the Department of Ed and the local school system that could definitely use some cutting.
Thank you, Mr. Gasway. Mr. Hatchett.
Well, thank you for the question. You know, I'm a product of public school education. I went to Habersham Central. I went to Georgia Tech. Public school, I went to University of Georgia for law school, all public schools. The Georgia Department of Education, you know, I don't foresee how it would be feasible to cut them completely. I feel like, you know, yeah, local control is very important, and allowing different school districts to dictate certain curriculum, areas of curriculum and spending is important. But it's also important to have a uniform system, and I think the Georgia Department of Education has done a great job, and Governor Kemp is a big proponent of education and a big proponent of public education and giving teachers raises. And I would yield to his decision regarding this question. Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Hall.
Yes, sir. Well, I'll tell you what I would abolish if I could, and that's the federal Department of Education, because it is a state's right. Education is a state's right. So I don't think we need the federal, but that's not my choice. Specifically related to your question, I can tell you that I believe in local control for education. I don't think that things that may work in Macon or Augusta or Savannah won't work in our community, and vice versa. So the control and those type of decisions should be left to local leaders to know what's best. I don't believe that one size fits all for the students. I believe every student is uniquely gifted and needs a different situation to reach their full potential. Again, I spent 12 years in the classroom teaching at every level, and I'm very passionate about education. I do think that there's a place for state guidance in education, but at the same time, I think we test kids on mandated tests, on standardized tests. I like to be able to see teachers have more time to tap into their own creative abilities and passions and teach a little bit differently than just focusing so much time on standardized tests.
Thank you, Mr. Hall. Mr. Moore.
Yes, sir. Thank you for the question. As I mentioned earlier, I'm a previous teacher. I taught in elementary, middle, and high school, and I'm not in favor at all of cutting out anything from the state level, because there's got to be some accountability. Now, my wife is a current first grade public school teacher in Franklin County, and we're blessed to have great teachers in Franklin County. But in this district, it's a very, very different district if you go to all the counties. It's got some similarities, but it's got differences. And I think each county should have its representation of what it knows best. We need to take the bureaucracy out of education and be what education is for, and that's teaching our kids, shaping our future, and building a stronger Georgia. Because if they get a good education, they stay in our district, they raise their families in our district, and they continue to provide great opportunities for others in our district.
Thank you. Our next question is still in the education category, and it says, last year, the governor gave teachers a $3,000 increase, but that required school boards to increase the benefits. And that really amounted to an unfunded mandate for local school boards. What's your position on unfunded mandates? And Ms. Hise.
Unfunded mandates are extremely frustrating. It's not equitable. It's not fair for the state to implement unfunded mandates and to require our local governments, our local municipalities to come up with the money. Let me explain something to you. I graduated with a ton of debt, school debt. And the one thing that I wanted to be able to do was to work for the state. There was a bill passed and it went into law that allowed forgiveness, loan forgiveness for good people that could work as a good prosecutor, but it was unfunded. And so because of that, I had no other choice but to leave my state job. So I understand firsthand how difficult it is to face a mandate or a requirement from the state and at a local level to kind of scratch your head. Now, I also understand that the governor, and I support him 100%, is trying very, very hard to make sure that our teachers are provided for, that their cost of living increases are met, and that they are rewarded for all of the hard work that they have done with our school kids. And I believe that because of the COVID-19 crisis, every single parent who is having to homeschool their children at home understands the value of an education.
Time is up, Ms. Hise. Thank you. Mr. Gasway.
Well, as far as unfunded mandates, they come down from the federal level to the state level in various forms. Nobody likes that. They come down from the state level to the county level in various forms, and nobody likes that. At the end of the day, it's just how our system works. I will say this. The counties, the state has no tool to stop county wastefulness at the county Board of Education level. So I got in a little trouble in a campaign a couple years back because I was pointing out the fact that Habersham County had a $20 million slush fund. Well, there's nothing the state can really do about that except put more spending on them. If they're going to overtax their people and the people can go along with it, then the state has no real tool to get them back in line other than to send expenses. And I think that's just how it works. I mean, the teachers needed a raise and it wasn't enough, but it's all they're going to get, unfortunately, with this situation we're in now. But I think it had to be done and he did the right thing.
Thank you. Mr. Hatchett.
Well, thank you. You know, Governor Kemp, the state of Georgia, we've fully funded education for the past 2 years. And Governor Kemp has done a great job giving teachers a well-deserved pay raise. And I fully support that decision. As far as the unfunded mandates, you know, like someone said earlier, it starts from the top and works its way down. And they're frustrating. And that's something that you definitely have to have a check on because if they can mandate, if the federal government can mandate a state and a state can mandate a city to do something that they have no control over, that's bad in my opinion. And so, you know, unfunded mandates need to be well scrutinized, and that's something I'll do as state senator.
Thank you. Mr. Hall?
Yes, sir. Thank you. Well, as chairman of the Habersham County Commission, I can tell you I'm well versed on a number of unfunded mandates that we've had to struggle with, especially during the budgeting process when we've had this thrust upon us. We've had to scramble to try to figure out how we were going to pay for it. It's been a big issue. And I can tell you I've had many conversations with other commissioners throughout the district, other chairmen, county chairmen that are struggling and have had this issue time and time again. I cannot promise as a state senator that it will never happen because I'm just one vote. But what I can say is that I will work to prevent unfunded mandates as best I can because it really does put local leaders in a very tough situation where they're scrambling to try to come up with revenue to match the cost of an unfunded mandate. I will want to communicate with local leaders, and I think that's a big part of what I want to accomplish as state senator is have that constant dialogue and let folks know what's happening and what's coming down the pipe so that at the very least, they'll be able to have a heads up about it and plan accordingly for these unfunded mandates.
Thank you, Mr. Hall. Mr. Moore.
Well, I will give you an example like I told my wife when she got her $3,000 raise from the state. It's a great thing, and she was very thankful, and all the teachers were very thankful. But at the end of the day, it put a tremendous strain on our local Board of Education as well. At the end of the day, who did it affect? Us as taxpayers. I'm not in favor of the unfunded mandates, but at the end of the day, it's just like everything else in big government, it affects the taxpayer. So until people start standing up on the local and state level and federal level for these unfunded mandates, they're not going to stop. You need a voice to stand up, and I'm that voice. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Moore. Mr. Garrison.
Yes, sir. Well, number one, I am a teacher, and so I understand the need for a raise. I went through the furlough period some years ago, and as a police officer and a trainer, we had several unfunded mandates, and they are not enforceable. You can't enforce an unfunded mandate. You can make suggestions. But other than that, what we need to do is we need to go back, and I think it's a little bit of passing the buck. If you're saying I'm going to do it, but I'm not going to fund it, but you can fund it, I just think it's a little double talk, and I'm not for unfunded mandates at all.
Thank you, everyone. I'm going to move on and talk a little bit about government structure now. The first question, Republicans talk about smaller, less intrusive government. How would you begin to bring that concept to fruition at a state level? And we'll start with Mr. Gasaway.
Great. I will say that over the past 16 to 18 years of Republican control at the state house, that has come to fruition. I think per capita state spending has been maintained or reduced. And we're a growing state. We are one of the fastest growing states in the country. And if you really look at per capita spending, the Republican majority over the past 16 years has done an outstanding job of controlling spending. And unfortunately, wow, we're in another economic crisis like nobody's ever seen, and it's going to be very difficult to hold the line on taxes. There's going to be tremendous pressure to hold the line on taxes, but that's what must be done in order for us to recover as a state and get back on track where we were. But our Republican majority has done an excellent job over the past 16 years. And that means every member of the legislature and every governor together, because we have a clear record of reducing spending on a per capita basis. No one can dispute that.
Thank you. Mr. Hatchett.
Well, that's a great question. First, I would start with state regulation, from farmers to small business owners. A common theme that I hear when I'm out in the district is we're overregulated. And that is a issue that's from, the state level down. And I think it should be left to local control, not only on the level of county government, but on the level of someone's own farm. I would fight for less regulation in agriculture, less regulation in small businesses, and obviously try to lessen the tax burden, especially at the state level on counties, property taxes, and small businesses. Decreasing state taxes also decreases the burden and the control that the state has over our local economy.
Thank you, Mr. Hatchett. Mr. Hall.
Yes, sir. Well, certainly regulation could be a big part of it. There maybe perhaps remove some redundancy in some personnel positions. But, I'm a free market capitalist. I think the free market can typically do a lot better job in many instances than the government because of the competition. So I would say let's look at outsourcing some certain functions of the government. Maybe it's accounting, maybe it's various other functions of the government, and let's put to work the capitalist market that we've got right in our backyard. I think a lot of times you've got this creep of government that, well, we need something done, let's create a position for it to do it, or we need this service provided, let the government do it. Instead of thinking like that, I think the exact opposite. Let's do less government and let's try to outsource some of these functions. There's plenty of businesses that would bid at a lower rate and compete for that service. I don't think we need to create government opportunities to do that. And I think we can scale down the size of government by looking to outsource some of these functions.
Thank you, Mr. Hall. Mr. Moore.
Raising taxes only makes government bigger. less efficient and a bigger burden on the taxpayers. We need to look at what we're spending our taxpayer dollars on, and we need to prioritize it. When I came in as mayor of Franklin Springs, a lot of things were being done that could have been done in-house. We were paying people to come in and change out light bulbs for $75 an hour. And, you know, by looking at little things, they can reduce the size and scope of our government. We can't do anything that can make it even bigger, but I'm not in favor of any kind of tax burden on Georgians, and I will not support a tax increase or raising other program fees to pay more for spending than we may not need.
Thank you, Mr. Moore. Mr. Garrison.
Yes, sir. I am an advocate of a zero-based budgeting system. And for those who are not interested or familiar with that, it's that every year you've got to justify what you're doing, what you're spending money on. If you have a program, if it wants to continue, does it need to decrease? That's something you got to do every year. When we start talking about large government, I'm a conservative Republican. I think larger government is a bad thing. I mean, we're always wanting to streamline our government. Unfortunately, in certain times when our government has been growing, our agencies have been growing. Again, but if we went back to this zero-based budget approach, what we would be doing is evaluating every year and then keeping it lean and mean.
Thank you, Mr. Garrison. Ms. Hise.
Well, to quote my favorite president, President Ronald Reagan, get the government off the backs of the people. And that's what I'm about. I'm about less government, less spending. I'm about trimming the fat and getting rid of the waste. And perhaps there is a silver lining through the pandemic that we have suffered. Perhaps the budget cuts, the 4%, the 6% for the 2020 fiscal year, as well as the new 14% budget cuts that are being asked across the board, perhaps this is an opportunity for us, we as Republicans, to look at the reduction of government in a positive way. Now, I'm not talking about cutting any type of necessary services like public safety. I'm not talking about cutting teachers. What I'm talking about cutting is the fat. And we all know that despite the fact that the Republicans down in the state Senate and in the state House have done everything that they've made great strides in being able to make those cuts, there's still things that can be done to be able to accomplish that.
All right. Thank you very much for those answers. The next question, again, under government structure, it says many taxpayers believe that the Board of Regents operate with little or no oversight. The question is, what would you propose to rein in their unbridled ability to incur debt? And that question starts with Mr. Hatchett.
Thank you. You know, I think it goes back to the zero-based budgeting that was introduced several years ago. And that's where you start at zero and you have to account for each dollar that you spend. I know the Board of Regents is not a typical agency like the zero-based budgeting would apply to, but if you're going to rein in that spending and you're going to hold them accountable, you know, I think that's a very good approach to begin solving that problem. Thanks.
Thank you, Mr. Hatchett. Mr. Hall.
Yes, sir. Well, this is something I'm very passionate about. I've spent 21 years working on a college campus at different universities, public and private, as a college professor and a college administrator. And I'm very concerned about the increased cost of attendance at these universities while professors teach less and less classes. A lot of more money is going into building facilities and various other things. And I'll be honest with you, I am very concerned about the level of spending on these college campuses. And I would absolutely advocate, because I've seen it firsthand. I've been taught at a lot of these big colleges. I've been very up close and personal with a lot of the college administrators at these big campuses, and there's a lot of money being spent, needlessly so. And this is something as a state senator that I would absolutely want to work to curtail, because I believe it's important. And in the end, our kids are.
Thank you, Mr. Hall. Mr. Moore.
It's about accountability, plain and simple. Our state colleges and universities, and even a lot of private ones now, have the persona to not educate, but to get as much money as they can. It's all about money now instead of educating. So we need to hold them accountable. As a state senator, we need to hold them accountable.
Thank you, Mr. Moore. Mr. Garrison?
Yes, sir. I've worked in the that system for many, many, many years, and I would have to agree that what we need is. I go back to my original statements. If you take public dollars, tax dollars, you need to be held accountable. And just because you may be an entity, whether it be the Board of Regents or whoever, you need to be held accountable to the taxpayers and use those funds, judiciously, and to make sure that you're not wasting them and that it's going to the right place at the right time. Yes, they should be accountable.
Thank you. Ms. Hise?
Well, perhaps you're referring to a recent arrest with a member of the Board of Regents and the scandal that has resulted from that. And I will tell you that I am aware of those problems. And I do believe that you have to have oversight. You have to have the ability to audit. You have to have the ability to fully understand what the Board of Regents is doing and that they're held accountable. With great power comes great responsibility. I'm a product of public education and I graduated from the University of Georgia. And I can tell you this, when I went to school at UGA, the price per credit hour was exponentially less. It was a fraction of what is being charged today. So the cost of education has substantially increased. And we, as me as the next state senator, believes and will participate in government oversight and being holding these people accountable. Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Gasway?
Well, I served on the Higher Education Committee in the State House for several years, and I can tell you it is out of hand. Part of the reason it's out of hand is because we created the Hope Scholarship and the Georgia Lottery in the early 90s as a state, and that created a tremendous influx of cash. And when there's a lot of cash, prices go up. That's just the nature of it. The other reason is that the Board of Regents, University System of Georgia, have become sort of a place where when governors go out of office, a lot of their staff ends up working at those universities and colleges around the state. And so that gives them additional layer of protection because you don't want former governor staffs getting fired. That's just the reality of how things work. We have to recognize we do have some of the best research institutions in the country here in Georgia. We want to maintain those, but we do need to find a way to give what we jokingly call in the legislature the fourth branch of government, which is the Board of Regents. We need to find a way to get more accountability in the fourth branch of government. Thank you.
Thank you. Do want to remind our listeners or our viewers out there that there is a straw poll being run by the Raven County Republicans on their Facebook page. I want you to go to that as soon as tonight's debate is over and select your choice for candidate for this 50th district in the state Senate. I want to switch the questioning now to the COVID-19 pandemic. First question says the COVID-19 pandemic shut our schools and pointed out the need for rural broadband as an education tool. As a state senator, what steps will you take to ensure that there is adequate broadband coverage for our children? And we'll start that question with Mr. Hall.
Yes, sure. Thank you. Again, I'm a big believer in the free market and competition in the marketplace. One of the issues related to this specifically is the cost of entry into this business. There's a lot of poll fees that you've got to pay, or there's a lot of exceptionally high cost of building new infrastructure to do this, which has prohibited other companies from coming into the rural marketplace and build that infrastructure in order to compete with Windstream. You've got trailways through the EMCs that has helped certain folks if you're lucky enough to live in certain areas. I'm not lucky enough to live in that area, but there are ways that we can help incentivize the EMCs to do better or to be able to build out their infrastructure. And I think that's going to have to be the solution, because the cost of entry into this marketplace is so astronomically expensive. I'm not a believer that Windstream is going to be able to correct their infrastructure and their technology. I do believe that fiber is the way to go, and that we've got to be able to incentivize and work with our EMCs to grow that. But I'm also for.
Thank you, Mr. Hall. Your time is up. Mr. Moore.
As we've seen in the last several weeks, and I've seen daily at my house, and as we're Zooming tonight, you know, broadband is a very, very important and essential part of not only Northeast Georgia lives, but Georgians and Americans' lives. I feel like we could use, you know, Georgia Power, our EMCs. This is a diverse district. You know, we have mountains in our district. We have big farmlands in our district. And just getting these companies to get broadband out and about is a lot easier said than done. But if we, and I say we, as our state legislature, could work with Georgia Power and our EMCs to use public right-of-ways, to work with our cities and our counties, to use public infrastructures, as in power poles or light posts on sidewalks to use for broadband and wireless internet, that would be a tremendous step and help for our communities and our people in this district to progress in broadband.
Thank you, Mr. Moore. Mr. Garrison?
Yes, sir. Thank you for that question. You know, this COVID-19, coronavirus, whatever you want to call it, this pandemic that we're in, has showed us a lot of things that we're in need of. And one of those is not only computers, but it is broadband. In our local community, we've had schools getting hotspots, putting on buses and going to different places. But, you know, for every problem, there's a solution if you know where to look. The USDA Rural Development Program, Ms. Joyce White, has a Reconnect program that is available to North Georgia. And all you have to do is apply for it. And there's millions of dollars that's being spent on this one issue to increase broadband for our communities. So my solution is, let's get with the USDA Rural Development Program and let's go with the Reconnect program and get some dollars into our community.
Thank you, Mr. Garrison. Ms. Hise?
So this is an issue that impacts, I'm sure, everyone, including myself. My 8.5-year-old son is daily trying to log on to my internet supplier in order to try to make sure that he can accomplish his homework. This is a problem facing so many people throughout Senate District 50. And the bottom line is this. The bottom line has to be being able to provide the services to the constituents, to the people of Senate District 50. As your next state senator, that is my focus. I will not be beholden to any lobbyists. I will not be beholden to anyone, any type of special interests who are trying to make a dollar off of the person who's at the end of the line, okay? So Senate Bill 2 last year was passed. John Wilkinson was a co-sponsor of that bill. It allowed EMCs across the state of Georgia to be certified in order to provide internet services. The USDA has provided and obtained grants within the last 2 weeks for EMCs to be able to apply for those grants at the USDA level in order to offset those costs.
Thank you, Ms. Hise. Mr. Gasaway?
Of course, this was an issue my entire 6 years in the General Assembly. I think we've made progress. I think the biggest challenge is that internet is not considered an essential utility. We all watched it come from the mid-90s to now, and I can't believe how far we've come. I think by saying it's essential, putting it under the Public Service Commission would be a great step. If you don't know, when your phone line goes out, it has to be fixed promptly, or your phone company gets in deep trouble. But if your internet goes out, the same phone company, they don't have that sense of urgency. It's because of regulation and requirements. I think that internet and broadband is an essential utility, and I'm hopeful that this crisis, if anything, has shown us all how essential broadband in our home is. And I'm very hopeful that this crisis, this may be a good that comes out of this crisis. We may see a huge federal initiative to push broadband into every home, because teachers like my wife, who's been a public school teacher 26 years, they may have to teach from home a lot in the future until we get this pandemic under control. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Gasaway. Mr. Hatchett?
Well, you know, this internet in rural areas has obviously improved dramatically over the past several years. And I remember when we still had to use dial-up, and it took a minute to load a web page. But, you know, this coronavirus pandemic has obviously exposed some weaknesses in high-speed internet. And there are people in rural Northeast Georgia that just don't have access and don't have the luxury of working from home and getting on a Zoom conference like we do, because they just don't have the speed. I think the best way to get it done is to work with the EMCs to somehow incentivize competition and make sure that Senate District 50 does not get left behind from the rest of the state. And that's what I do as your state senator.
Thank you, Mr. Hatchett. Staying with the COVID-19 pandemic, it's brought to the forefront the need to balance between protecting lives and protecting livelihoods. Many of the legislative pieces that come across your desk, should you be elected our state senator, require you to balance those two conflicting needs. Can you talk about your thought process when you're reviewing bills where those two things are at play? How would you go about that? And we'll start with Mr. Moore.
I'm not sure I understand that, the difference between lives and livelihood. What?
Livelihood is the economic side of one's life.
And just their life
Lives
in
is
general.
the physical presence.
Okay, all right. That is a tough question to answer, but you know, the thing about it, you know, at the end of the day, you know, God created us all equal, and a human life is the most important thing. Money comes and money goes. So at the end of the day, all my decisions will be made with public life in mind. But I understand the question regarding this COVID-19 situation. But I do feel like when you get the facts and get the evidence and know when you make your decision the difference between life and livelihood, I will make the right decision for life, and depending on if it helps the livelihood of that. I mean, it's just a tough question to answer.
Thank you, Mr. Moore. Mr. Garrison?
Yes, sir. You know, being a public safety professional for 38 years, I have seen the problems when things aren't going right, when the livelihood is not there. People start getting in desperate times. You know, as your next state senator, I'll tell you that I'll be 100% for doing what is right for the state of Georgia and for the people of the 50th district, and that is protecting life first. But you have to have a balance, and I'll make sure, because again, it gets back to common sense. You know, we have to live, we have to eat, we have to pay rent, we have to pay mortgage, we have to buy groceries, we have to put our kids in school, and that comes from livelihood. That's why I'm eager to get our economy boosted back and make sure we can start bringing dollars in and getting the confidence we need to run our country.
Thank you, Mr. Garrison. Ms. Hise?
I'm pro-life, and what that means is that I am pro-life from the unborn to the grave. And so the protection of our elderly and those that are at high risk is extremely important. And that's exactly what our governor and our president has done. They have put the preservation of life first. And we went through a series of time where we had a shelter in place. We saw that businesses thought outside the box. There was innovation. They were able to reinvent themselves, and our communities have supported them in that. I serve as the governmental affairs chair for the Chamber of Commerce, as well as the Chamber of Commerce's task force through the COVID-19 crisis in support of our small businesses. So I understand that while I will always put the preservation of life first, the balance of being able to put our citizens back to work and to support our school system and our public safety and all the other things that come with revenue, I know that as a small business owner, we will be able to work through those.
Thank you, Ms. Tice. Mr. Gassaway?
Well, like everything at the General Assembly, all issues are about competing interests. I don't care what the issue is. There's somebody who's for it and there's somebody who's against it. I've been watching the governor of New York be so concerned about life as I am, but yet he's pro-abortion. So some of his rhetoric just makes no sense to me, but that's part of competing interests in his constituency. You know, I feel like we're learning about this pandemic every day. We're learning how to manage through it. It's just like having a personal disease or illness that you have to learn to manage the symptoms, and we have to do the best, smartest thing. I think shutting down the state until we understood what we were into was the right thing, because it took us 30 to 45 days to realize what this really was. And we're there. I think we understand it now. I think we'll have spikes, we'll have valleys and troughs for several months until there's a vaccine. But, you know, we have to be smart. And I'm as pro-life as anybody in this panel, but we have to be smart and move forward.
Thank you, Mr. Gasaway. Mr. Hatchett?
Oh, thank you. Protecting lives and protecting livelihoods. You know, there's a majority of people in this Senate district that would argue they are the same. Some people live paycheck to paycheck and they can't put food on the table if they're not at work. There were difficult decisions made in shutting down the economy when it was shut down in the shelter-in-place order. But I think as a state senator, you've got to find the balance, and you've got to determine when shelter-in-place order is appropriate and when it isn't. You know, an issue that some people don't bring up is, yes, thousands of people have died from this coronavirus, and it's a shame. But there are millions of babies that are aborted worldwide, and as a pro-life senator, that's something you got to stand up for, and that's why I would always support any pro-life legislation in the state Senate.
Thank you, Mr. Hatchett. Mr. Hall?
Thank you, Pat. Well, this is exactly why I believe experience matters. I'll tell you, as the chairman of the Habersham County Commission, we were right in the crosshairs with this very issue. Before the governor issued the statewide shelter in place, we were under enormous amount of pressure to close businesses from a lot of the folks in the medical field. And I understood their position, and we ended up passing a resolution that did provide for a shelter in place, but also allowed for folks to work because that was necessary for them to put food on the table. And if you don't eat, you don't live. And that was going to cause a lot of problems, folks not working. So I think your question, Pat, was about the process. I will tell you the process on these type of tough decisions with me is gathering data, okay? I gather as much information as I can from experts, from research, wherever I can get it. I gather as much data as I can. I analyze that data to try to make the best informed decision. Then I will tell you, I pray about it. I don't make any kind of decision like that without earnest prayer, which is important to me. And I think that helps me make the right decision. I don't always get it right, but I always try to go through that process so I have the most data available.
Thank you, Mr. Hall. Well, you know, sometimes we don't tell you all the areas we're going to cover with our questions. And the next category is just labeled wild card. So our first question in wild card is Senate Bill 415, a tort reform bill co-sponsored by Senator Wilkinson, was introduced in the Senate in February. It passed out of committee early in March and then was tabled. And then COVID-19 shut down the legislature. What's your position on tort reform? And we're going to start with Mr. Garrison.
I'm just concerned. I'm wondering if this is going to be the same issue that we talked about last week, where Senator Wilkinson's brought up about the mandatory siding on houses. That's not it.
No.
Okay. Well then,
no. This is the issue regarding suing people and the onerous effect that has on businesses across the state. And on the reverse, the opponents of tort reform are saying you're taking away individuals' rights to sue, their individual protection.
Is this the right to farm we're talking about?
No.
Again, I'm lost at your number one. I guess the question is, should someone be allowed to sue if they have standing? The answer is yes. But it all depends. I'm a firm believer in the right to farm bill. They shouldn't be allowed to sue people that have been creating a livelihood for 100 years at their own farm if they don't like the smell or whatever like that. So if we're talking about being able to sue for cause, just because it's inconvenient is not a good reason to sue. But I think that option should be made available in order to keep people going the right way and doing the right thing.
Thank you, Mr. Garrison. Ms. Hise?
This is a complicated question that requires an answer that lasts more than 60 seconds, but let me try to wrap it up very quickly. First and foremost, I have a great working relationship with the senators, the state senators under the Gold Dome, including John Wilkinson and Steve Gooch. Steve Gooch is the one that basically spearheaded the campaign to introduce the bill 415, Senate Bill 415, as it relates to tort reform, and it included a vast number of itemized issues. It was tabled because there was not enough votes for it to go forward. It was sent to, I know this is, basically, bottom line is this. I have been in contact with Steve Gooch. I have spoken with him at length about the tort reform bill. I believe that there are areas in which that the insurance companies, as well as the Chamber of Commerce, as well as the trial lawyers, can all come together and reach some type of compromise. I will tell you this, I am a constitutionalist. I believe very firmly that the trial by jury, which is provided in the Constitution, is a local matter and is a local issue, and I stand by the Constitution of the United States and the Constitution of the state of Georgia.
Thank you, Ms. Hise. Mr. Gassaway? Mr. Gassaway, are you there?
Yes, thank you. I wasn't sure. I'm having trouble hearing you.
Sorry.
I think this is actually one of the questions where you can start differentiating the candidates in this race. Certainly, we had some pretty substantial tort reform in the mid-2000s in Georgia, and it really has not been touched since then. The Georgia Trial Lawyers Association is, of course, the lobby group that will be against this bill. I think one of the candidates may be backed by that organization. But the bottom line is we have to look at what's fair. What's fair for businesses, not just for trial lawyers. I mean, trial lawyers are still getting rich in Georgia. So what can we do to maintain fairness in a competing arena? And I think that we're going to see horrific attacks by trial lawyers against our senior industry after this attack. And it wasn't their fault. This virus was not the fault of the senior nursing homes and so forth. And we need to make sure they're protected. And the trial lawyers are going to see this as a way to get rich. And that's what the legislature's role is, to balance that. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Gassaway. Mr. Hatchett?
Well, this is a question that I've heard several times. And, you know, if you're a true constitutionalist, you believe in the First Amendment, the Second Amendment, you believe in the Seventh, which is trial by jury. If someone, a drunk driver working for a company, hits you, kills one of your loved ones, do you want to have your damages capped? That's a tough question. For me, the second you start using laws to whittle away your constitutional rights, it opens up the door for the rest. But, you know, I can see both sides of the coin. My dad's a physician. His dad was a dentist. I'm a lawyer. I'm an attorney. I know both sides of the issues very well. But as far as the tort reform bill goes, if you're a true constitutionalist, you got to be careful with this one.
Thank you, Mr. Hatchett. Mr. Hall?
Yes, sir. Thank you. Well, I know John Wilkinson and Senator Steve Gooch very well, and Steve Gooch was sponsored this bill, and we have talked at length about this very thing, and I support tort reform, and here's why. And this bill does not limit somebody's ability to sue. Everybody has a right to sue, and I would defend that right. And if a company is negligent, they have a right to seek damages. Absolutely, wholeheartedly, I support that. But what this bill does is to limit the frivolous lawsuits that will drive businesses out of business, or they are forced to settle on a case where that if they work it through the system, they may have won, but it's a lot cheaper to just settle, even if they weren't at fault. So there's some limitations that's put in place on this bill that matches federal level protections. And it would lower the cost of insurance premiums, and it would lower the cost of goods. So this bill will help consumers and will help the folks that live in our district. So I absolutely wholeheartedly support this bill.
Thank you, Mr.
I believe
Hall.
we need it.
Mr. Moore, are you there?
Yes, I couldn't hear you, Patrick. I'm sorry.
I'm sorry.
Yes, I 100% support this bill, tort reform. And I want to be clear. I love my brother very much, but he would not support this bill. My brother's an attorney, but I'm a small business owner. And what this bill does is it protects people like me. It keeps my insurance down, and it keeps from one situation with one of my employees or one of my drivers from going bankrupt and losing my business. So yes, sir, I do support that bill, and I support Senator Wilkinson and Gooch for doing this bill.
Now, I know that in the rules, we said if you were referred to by name, you would have a chance to respond. I know also that I introduced two of the candidates as attorneys. So I'm going to open it up and ask if either of the attorneys on the candidate debate here feel a need to respond.
No, I don't.
I'll respond.
All right, go ahead, Ms. Hise, you've got a minute.
Thank you very much. Well, I just want to make it perfectly clear that I'm not endorsed by any type of lobbyist from Atlanta. I'm not taking money from any type of lobbyist in Atlanta. I will tell you that I'm a small business owner. My husband and I own a small business. Yes, I'm also an attorney. I've worked hard to get where I am in life. I think that after speaking both with John Wilkinson and with Steve Gooch, both of whom I love and respect very, very much and have a great working relationship, I believe that there is some room within these bills to be able to reach a compromise that satisfies me as a small business owner, but a compromise that also satisfies me as a constitutionalist, where the trial by jury in the 7th Amendment is honored and respected. And so I would love to discuss this with the constituents. You can reach me at 706-499-8495. And I'd look forward to working with Senator Gooch through these challenges. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Hise. The next question says, as a state senator, how would you be responsive to citizens' requests for negotiating through government or for proposing certain legislative bills? So we'll start with Ms. Hise.
I'm sorry, I did not understand your question.
The question is, how would you be responsive to citizens' requests for either help in negotiating through government agencies or for sponsoring specific legislation that they would like to see brought forward? Well,
first of all, as your next state senator, my job is to directly report to my constituents. I am who I am, and my platform is very clear, and I'm not the establishment candidate in this race. I am true to myself, to my moral compass, and my soul is not for sale. My responsibility are to the constituents. And so when a constituent or a group of constituents comes to me and asks me to present a bill or to work through a governmental entity in order to establish a specific recourse or result, then I will do that. I'm actively involved in the GOP, and I have been for a very long time, but I represent my constituents and the voters, and my ties, my loyalty are to the people that I represent and no one else.
Thank you, Ms. Hise. Mr. Gasaway.
Well, I have a long record of constituent service. I have a long record of helping my people in Northeast Georgia fight off the EPD when they were bringing unfair regulations on farms as well as businesses in Stevens County. It's something you should do as a state senator. A lot of state senators hand it off to their legislative aides, and that doesn't work. I'll be honest with you, it does a lot more if a state bureaucracy like Department of Revenue is not doing something for somebody. A phone call directly from the state senator does a lot more than a phone call from his legislative aide. And I'm willing to do that. I have a record of doing that for individuals and businesses, and that's what it takes. And I know you can make something happen if you're a state senator and you call the Department of Revenue and somebody hasn't gotten a car title they were looking for 6 weeks ago. It's amazing if a state senator calls, the car title shows up 3 days later. That's what you need to do, and that's what a state senator should be doing.
Thank you, Mr. Gasaway. Mr. Hatchett.
Can I get you to repeat the question?
Yeah, if you're elected state senator, how would you be responsive to citizens' requests for help negotiating the state agencies or with help in passing particular legislation?
Well, I think that goes to being a homegrown Republican. You know, I've got a great pulse on this community. I've got good relationships with people in the community, from business leaders all the way down to, people who rent apartments from me, to neighbors. I mean, I've got, and it's all about communication. And, I've made it very clear. If you want to call me directly at any time, you can find my cell phone pretty much anywhere. And that's something that I'm trying to do across the district is establish these relationships to hear the people. And relationships with constituents is one thing, but being a state senator is about relationships as well, because our job, when it boils down, is to push a red button or a green button, and to vote yes or to vote no. But having relationships with the heads of the government agencies, Burt Brantley, Pat Wilson at the Economic Development, those relationships can help in bringing jobs, and it can help with constituents' issues that they may have with government agencies.
Thank you, Mr. Hatchett. Mr. Hall?
Yes, well, I think the question speaks directly to access and constituent services, and that's why I'm running, is to help folks in our community. Certainly, they'll be able to access me without question. I will be involved and engaged in the community. I already have very positive existing relationships with just about every elected official in the district, and throughout my career, education and business career, I have been very successful at building relationships. So as a state senator, working with various state agencies, and in certain situations, federal agencies, getting to know them, building those relationships, and being able to use those relationships to help solve problems within the district, and to help be available for folks and hear them, listen to them, understand their situation, and then get them the help they need through the various relationships that I build. But I think access and being available is absolutely critical to being a successful state senator. And that's what I plan to do, because that's why I'm running. That's the whole point, is to help folks.
Mr. Hall. Mr. Moore?
I have a 10-year proven track record of being open and there for my constituents. I lead by example, and there's no job too big or too small. I can always be reached on my cell phone by anyone, and I would be the one by leading by example and doing the job and doing it right the first time.
Thank you, Mr. Moore. Mr. Garrison?
Thank you for that question. How can you be an effective leader if you don't know what your constituents need? My doors are always going to be open. Again, that's why I'm running, to make sure we have a common sense approach to our state government. You got to hear what your constituents want. You have to understand their needs and their desires, and it's my job to be your voice under the gold dome.
Thank you, Mr. Garrison. So our last question: if you're elected to represent District 50 in the state Senate, what will be your #1 priority? And we'll start with Mr. Gasaway.
Well, of course, all of our priorities have changed with what's just happened over the past 60 days. The state budget and what we do to generate the revenue to balance the state budget over the next 2 or 3 or even 4 years that will take to come out of this recovery is going to be the first priority. I certainly have some legislative initiatives that I was working on as a state House member that I would like to bring back, including some ethics-related legislation. I have some election-related legislation that I'd like to see passed. We have some problems with our election system, and right now, Ms. Abrams has taken the voice for people who want election integrity in Georgia, and she's become the voice about Georgia elections. And no one is really speaking for election integrity in the state of Georgia, and I want to be that voice too, because that is not the voice that she's speaking from. And we really need to focus on election integrity in our state. We have a problem that can be fixed and needs to be fixed. That's just some of my priorities. But at the end of the day, it's a team business. You have to work with the Republican governor, and you have to work with Democrat members of the Senate and the House as well to get legislation moved. And I think I have an effective record of doing that. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Gasaway. Mr. Hatchett?
Oh, thank you. My top priority would be, one of the reason why I began to run for office. It's because, this state, Stacey Abrams was almost our governor, and there's a blue wave coming out of Atlanta, and with it comes new ideas that don't exactly align with our Northeast Georgia values. So obviously my first priority would be to preserve our Northeast Georgia values and to prevent it from attack from liberals and any socialist ideas that may try to step in. Obviously, agriculture, deregulation in agriculture would be a huge priority of mine as well. Supporting our teachers and supporting our police officers.
Thank you, Mr. Hatchett. Mr. Hall?
Well, certainly my first priority would be to represent District 50 with honor and character and integrity. As far as legislative priorities, certainly, as we mentioned, I am a constitutionalist standing up for our Second Amendment right. I'm pro-life, so supporting any legislation that would protect the rights of the unborn. Some other areas we talked about tort reform. I'm a big proponent of tort reform. I'm a big proponent of the Right to Farm Act that will help protect our farmers. I'd like to see more vocational training in our high schools. I think that's very important. I would like to see supporting initiatives that provide for additional stability for our rural healthcare. I can tell you, as a former chairman of a rural hospital, they are under siege, and our rural hospitals are exceptionally important to the residents in this area. And I'd like to see some more work done to help support them. So those are just a few legislative priorities that I will have, but above all, represent with honor, character, dignity.
Thank you, Mr. Hall. Mr. Moore.
Just like Mr. Gassaway said a little while ago, that things have changed drastically in really all of our platforms and our priorities. And I feel like our state budget is going to be the top priority. Why? Because it affects all Georgians. All Georgians are going to be affected now in the next few years with this budget and with the current economic situation that we have. And with that budget, we need to protect our farmers, our agricultural interests. We need to protect our teachers. We need to protect all of our state agencies, which is our law enforcement and first responders. As those things are taken care of, we also can't turn a blind eye to the fact that, yes, in the state of Georgia, socialism is getting stronger and stronger, and we must protect and stand up for our way of life, our Northeast Georgia way of life. We need to protect the unborn, the Second Amendment, and this great state. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Moore. Mr. Garrison.
Thank you for that question, Patrick. Number one, let's be honest. We're going to be spending most of our time next year working about our budget, trying to increase our revenues, decrease our expenses. But, you know, once that is done, being a freshman senator, I think it's important for us to find cement relationships so I can build those to help the people in my district. I think I'm pro police officer, public safety, I'm pro education, but one thing that we have failed to mention is our seniors. We have a lot of seniors in the 50th district, and I will be out there looking for them. I am one. I'm going to be looking out for you.
Thank you, Mr. Garrison. Ms. Hise.
So my number one priority as I take on being your next state senator is to implement my platform. First and foremost, we've got a budget problem. The way that we are able to fix that is to bring in revenues. The way that we're able to bring in revenues is to build a better bridge between our state government and our local government and our municipalities. We have to be able to enable our small businesses and our agriculture to think outside the box, to be innovative, and to be able to reinvent themselves. And what that means is less regulation, less laws, less oversight, and enable them to flourish. Second of all, part of my priority is that, of course, I'm pro Second Amendment, and I'm a constitutionalist when it comes to that. Pro-life, that means all of life, from the unborn to the elderly. Education, which includes technical education, college and career academies, private public partnerships between our technical colleges and technical providers and our high school system. Those are just parts of the things. Transportation, including roads and bridges. That is a part of my platform.
Thank you, Ms. Hise. We're now ready for closing statements, but before we get to that, I want to remind our viewers one more time that there is a straw poll that's being conducted on the Rabun County Republicans Facebook page. You've heard from all the candidates and you're about to hear their closing statements. So make sure that you go on the Rabun County Facebook page, the Rabun County Republican Facebook page, and vote in that straw poll. The order of closing statements is reverse of what we did with the opening statements. So for closing statements, we're going to start with Mr. Moore. You have 1.5 minutes, candidates. Mr. Moore?
Patrick, I'd like to thank you again for hosting this event tonight and the Towns County GOP. Y'all did a great job. I appreciate y'all getting all of our voices out and heard on a nice, beautiful Saturday evening in Northeast Georgia. I'm proud to be from Northeast Georgia. I'm running for the state Senate to ensure that our values and priorities have a conservative voice in Atlanta. I'll defend our Second Amendment rights, protect life, keep taxes low to grow jobs, support our local schools, and I'll stand up for our farmers. As your state senator, I'll always have Northeast Georgia on my mind, and I will always vote to put this district's needs first. I am one of you. I share the same values and visions for Georgia that you hope for. I'll use my experience as mayor and as a small businessman to grow the economy, protect our North Georgia conservative values, and fight the rise of socialism in our state. When you vote in the June 9th Republican primary, I hope you will vote for Lee Moore for state Senate. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Moore. Mr. Hall.
Yes, sir. Thank you. I appreciate Pat putting this together for us. Thank you for the Towns County GOP. My name is Stacey Hall, and I'm running to be your next state senator for District 50. I'm the only candidate in this race with extensive experience in education, business, local government, and rural health care. Spent 12 years in education, teaching at every level: elementary school, middle school, high school, taught special needs, undergraduate, graduate level college classes. I've spent 13 years in corporate America as a sales and marketing executive. Spent 5 years, along with my wife, owning and operating our own family business. I am in my second year as chairman of the Habersham County Board of Commissioners, fourth year overall as county commissioner, and I have experience as the chairman of our local hospital. I've been chairman of our local Chamber of Commerce. I've been involved with our Economic Development Council on several committees. I'm currently involved with our Habersham County Recovery Task Force to help small businesses get going again and rehiring folks. I've been involved with Leadership Georgia. I'm a graduate of Georgia Academy for Economic Development. And what does all this mean? The reason I'm saying that is because I think I can and want to use all those different experiences to help serve the constituents. I think as a state senator, experience matters, and you need a broad base of experience to serve our constituents well. And I want to be able to do that. Thank you, Pat.
Thank you, Mr. Hall. Mr. Hatchett.
Well, thank you, Pat. And I just would like to thank the Raven County and Towns County GOPs for coordinating together and putting this on. Again, my name is Bo Hatchett. Like I said in the beginning of the debate, if elected, I want to support President Trump's agenda at the state level. I want to defend your right to bear arms and protect innocent life. I've never run for public office before, never held public office before, but I believe we need an outsider approach to government. I don't believe socialism has any place in American politics, and I will work day and night to make sure that socialism never reaches the doorsteps of Northeast Georgia. I want this district to be a place where my kids want to raise their kids. And if you want to know where I stand on any issue, you can call me directly at 706-499-6941. That's 706-499-6941. You can also visit my website, hatchettforgeorgia.com, or my Facebook page, facebook.com/hatchettforgeorgia. I ask for your prayers and your vote in the June 9th election. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Hatchett. Mr. Gassaway.
Yes, thank you to the Towns County Republican Party, as well as the Raven County Republican Party. I have been involved in Republican politics in this state for over 22 years, back when it wasn't cool to be a Republican. And it's great to see such strong organizations in Northeast Georgia now. I would say that, again, all these candidates are ideologically very similar. How do you differentiate? I am the only candidate in this race with legislative experience. I served 6 years in the House of Representatives, both with Stephen Allison and Matthew Gertler. I say those names not to imply an endorsement, but to say, if you know those gentlemen, ask them about me. I don't know what they'll say, but I know I served with them. They know what I stand for. I have served this district in this area of the state with dignity for 6 years, and I look forward to your vote as a state senator. I have a record of standing against tax increases, and I think that, again, that is what the next state senator is going to have to be willing to do, is to have the backbone to stand against tremendous pressure on to increase taxes, because this economic environment has changed the environment for everyone. And the only way out of this is to reduce taxes and cut what we can in government, but we're going to have to hold the line on taxes at best. because we're in a serious time, and this is time for a serious state legislator. Ask for your vote and your prayers, and I appreciate your time tonight. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Gasway. Ms. Hise.
Thank you. Thank you, everyone, including you, Patrick, for putting this on. We really appreciate it. It's a great opportunity to meet people, to interact with people during the middle of a COVID-19 crisis. Normally, we would be doing things face to face, and I would be meeting my soon-to-be constituents out in public. So, you know, the barriers here are coming down. I'm Tricia Hise. I'm running for state senate. I am a Republican Christian conservative. I will be your voice under the Gold Dome. We do not need Atlanta telling us how to live, how to raise our families, how to work, how to worship, and how to play. We know what our values are. We know what it takes in order to succeed, to overcome, to work together, to have innovation, and to reinvent ourselves in the middle of a crisis. We are one. We are Senate District 50. I am pro-life, and what that means is that it means from the unborn all the way to the death. It's a protection of our elderly, and we have a problem in this state as it relates to our care of our elderly, and I will be their voice. I will be their champion. I am pro-Second Amendment, and what that means is that I am pro-gun. I am pro-small business. As a small business owner, I am in the trenches. I know and I feel your pain. I will represent you as your next state senator, and I will listen to my constituents and work with my constituents. I am for pro-transportation and building our roads and bridges, and also pro-education. And thank you so much for your time. I ask for your vote. You can reach me at 706-499-8495.
Thank you, Ms. Hise. Mr. Garrison.
Thank y'all. Thank y'all for conducting this forum and debate. I appreciate it. My name is Andy Garrison, and I'm a local boy born and raised who shares your conservative values, and I'm also a deacon and a Gideon. I've been your public servant for over 30 years by training your first responders who are on the front lines today. I'm very proud of that. Ask your public servants about me if you want to know more about me and my career. I love North Georgia as a place to live and do business. I'm a father and a grandfather who will do everything in my power to make this world better for my children, my grandchildren, and of course for you. I would be honored to serve you and be your voice as your next state senator. I'm asking for your vote on June 9th. I need you to vote Andy Garrison for state senate. My number is 706-369-1830. Or please visit my website at www.andy4senate50.com. There you will find the answers to many of the questions that you may have on your mind that was not covered here tonight. Thank you for your time, and thank you, and I hope you have a wonderful evening.
With that concludes this evening's candidate debate. I want to take the time to thank our sponsors, the Towns County Republican Party, and all the other county GOP organizations across District 50. A big thanks to our technical crew, Steve Harper and Robert Loyacoca. I also want to thank the candidates, first for being willing to offer yourselves for public service. Secondly, for participating in this effort to educate the voters of the 5th Senate District. Finally, I'd like to remind the voters that early voting begins on Monday, May 18th. The last day to register for this upcoming primary is May 11th. Primary election day is on Tuesday, June 9th, and the primary runoff, if there is one needed, will happen on August 11th. Remember to exercise your civic responsibility to vote and make your presence known through the absentee or the in-person voting. Again, thank you very much and have a great evening.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Thank you.
Thank you.